Good morning, everyone. We're going to give everybody about another minute or so to get scheduled in here, and we're going to go ahead and get started. Okay, well, good morning, everyone. Welcome to Alpine Brokerage's webinar, tips and tricks for 2022 with premium financing here. We are lucky enough to have Darren Sugiyama here from Lionsmark Capital. He is the president and founder, CEO, all things Lionmark, and he has been doing a wonderful job with our advisors in the premium finance space. My name is Dan Charlie. I'm the president of Alpine Brokerage. We're going to go through today some things that may help you to get your business moving in the right direction. If you are doing premium finance, and if you're not doing premium finance, kind of give you some of the tips that would differentiate you from some of the other people out there, and why Lionsmark Capital is having success in getting these cases placed. We all know that the world is a little bit different now, and insurance companies are working a little bit slower than they have been. And so it's critical to get these cases in and out in a timely fashion, and more importantly, have direct access to some very unique financing. So with that, I am going to hand it over to Darren. We are going to have this quick presentation here for Darren, and then we're going to take some questions. I would say put your questions in the chat box here, and we will get to those at the end of the presentation. So Darren, welcome, and take it over from here. Thank you so much.
All right, great to be here. So we're going to go over several different, value propositions that Lionsmark Capital offers agents. We work with agents all over the country. Again, as Dan said, we specialize in premium financing, but our method of premium financing is not your normal premium financing type of platform. I think the majority of the people on this call, if you've seen premium financing before, you've probably seen maybe one, maybe two maximum different versions of premium financing. But premium financing, there are several different ways to finance life insurance policies. And depending on the client's background, depending on their net worth, their liquidity, their risk tolerance, all those types of things, their overall profile is going to dictate the most mathematically prudent way to finance life insurance. We're going to show you a case study today that's one of several different methods. The one we'll show you today is a little bit more on the standard vanilla design. But again, at the very end of this webinar, we'll talk through several different types of designs, how they work, why they work, when they work, and all that good stuff. So before we get started here, I'll give you a real quick background of where I come from. I've been in the insurance game since 2003 and actually started out in the employee benefits space, built up a pretty substantial group health insurance agency. We were number one in the country with 3 different carriers concurrently. These are some of the books that I've written over the years. The first one in the top left-hand corner was the one that got the most steam. That was the first book I ever wrote. It was called How I Built a $37 Million Insurance Agency in Less Than 7 Years. That book, if you go to Amazon and type in insurance agency, it'll pop up on the first page. And I believe I have the most reviews out of any insurance agency book. As time went on, I was young. I had a giant ego. I hate to admit, I was in my mid 30s and had built a pretty decent sized agency. And I met a so-called financial advisor that his core business competency was supposedly life insurance. And he talked me into buying 17 life insurance policies, a big $20 million one on myself, and 17 other policies on my people at my company, and had a pretty creative, I'll just call it a supposedly tax advantaged strategy. After 3 years of pumping in a total of about $600,000 in premium into these policies, I hired a tax attorney to come in and do an internal audit to explain to me what this so-called financial advisor had done for me. After a week of audit, the tax attorney comes to me and says, Darren, I got bad news for you. Your plan is completely out of compliance. You got to unwind the whole thing. You have zero surrender value in your policies. And on top of that, you owe the IRS in the state of California $330,000 in back taxes, penalties, and interest. And man, that was a tough pill to swallow. I was obviously furious. I was embarrassed because I like to think I'm a pretty intelligent person. And I thought to myself, how many other business owners are trusting that their so-called financial advisor or their life insurance agent is doing the right thing for them when they really have no idea what's going on? Fortunately, I caught the mistakes 3 years into it as opposed to 23 years into it. But it inspired me to write the book in the bottom right-hand corner there. Ouch, how my financial advisor lost me $930,000 in 3 years. And that book is really the basis of that book is what got me into the life insurance space. The more I looked at these policies, the more I realized just how poorly designed many of them were. And we ended up starting to write a ton of life insurance. We had 45 agents under one roof out here in Southern California in Irvine. I had about a half a dozen remote offices, Manhattan, New York, Dallas, Texas, Seattle, Washington, Las Vegas, Nevada. And we were writing a sizable amount of policies. At one point, we were responsible for 38% of all the life insurance policies sold in Orange County for one particular carrier. And that was spreading the policies around through several carriers. So we did a decent amount of volume, and then I ended up getting into the premium financing business. In the premium financing space, I mean, you want to talk about a severe lack of due diligence from a mathematical perspective, and in my opinion, some egregious assumptions that are made and some modeling that is very irresponsible. It is the wild, wild west. And in some ways, AG 49 really ticked off a lot of agents in this community because it's been very restrictive. But on the other hand, it has prevented some of these egregious assumptions that these premium financiers have been making. It's locked them out of being able to do that. So it's kind of been a good thing and a bad thing. We'll talk about, again, how we stress test and back test using some very unique software that we developed internally here at my firm, and how all of that works. Give you a little bit more background in the process of building these agencies and writing books and such. I started doing sales coaching, very, very high level sales coaching for not only agency owners, but also for executives and even insurance carriers. And so I was telling Dan earlier, right before we started this call, in 2010, one particular insurance carrier had me traveling around to 22 different states to retrain their 6,000 agents how to sell the way that I sell and my firm sells. I'm going to play a quick 2-minute video here so you can kind of hear what some of these attendees had to say about what I taught them.
Day I sat through Darren's sales training, and I have to tell you, it was an incredible day. I have learned so much how to grow my business. It was a phenomenal training, something that I'm ready and chomping at the bit to get going and develop my future.
Just got through one of Darren's presentations. There was things I thought I understood, but now that I've seen Darren, I realized I just didn't get it before. But now that I've heard Darren's presentation, I understand what I was doing wrong and how to fix some of the presentations. And I really think after being with Darren today, my revenue is going to go way up.
We actually had the opportunity to participate in Darren's presentation this afternoon, but truly appreciated from the training was the simplicity of being able to implement a program, a system that makes sense to our producers, to our clients, to our brokers, that can be duplicatable.
I've been involved with 3 of Darren's trainings, and today I really grabbed the system approach that Darren has. It's simple, it's duplicatable, but honestly, it's the most value I've had in training in probably years.
I was part of Darren's training today, and the thing I really felt was the most important, or really the most had impact with me, is it's a system and I can take to my team, to my producers, and that they can use that exact same system and get the exact same type of results that he's gotten.
I sat through Darren's training twice today. Actually, I've already been through it a couple of times, and each time I'm amazed to look around the room and see people's faces light up when they get new ideas, new selling tips.
I just listened to Darren's presentation on sales with Colonial Life, and it puts it all in a nutshell in a clear, concise manner that an employer or decision maker can understand. And when I take that to the table for a customer, that's different than anything I've done in the past. And that's what's exciting to me about this program.
I just spent the day with Darren, entirely too short a day. If you have an opportunity to sit through anything like this, I don't care what it costs you to get there or how much you have to pay to stay there, you have to do this. 20 years in this business, all of Colonial Life, completely blown away by what I've learned today.
So, you know, when we look at I'm just going to call it the sales process or the communication process, the articulation process, when we are sitting with a client, one of the biggest challenges that I've seen, not only in this industry, but most industries, but we're talking about the life insurance industry. So in the life insurance industry, I think a lot of folks think that they have a prospecting problem. Other folks think they have an underwriting problem. Other folks think they have a COVID problem. Other people think they have an economy problem. The biggest problem that I see in the life insurance space is we have a clarity problem. There is a lack of clarity in terms of how the client is understanding what the actual value proposition is. That's the problem. If you've been in the life insurance space and you really understand the value of the product's construction, it's very difficult to understand why people would not park their money in IUL, for example, or even a whole life policy, for example. When you look at all the other options, the problem is that how do you prove that that is a prudent decision for the client to make? How do you mathematically prove that? How do you answer all the questions that the client has that they're afraid to ask or that they don't know to ask? The confused mind always does nothing, right? The uncertain mind always does nothing. And so you think, well, you got to work harder. You got to get more prospects. Well, that may be true, but if you just took the number of prospects you had and cleaned up the clarity piece of the message, and you just closed a higher percentage of the folks that you're talking to, you probably don't even necessarily need more prospects. What you need is for the clients to understand just how great that proposition is that you're making and have more of them, again, go through underwriting and put those policies in place. So what we're going to talk about today is not only premium financing, but also the problem with the sales process. And this can really be applied to premium financing and non-finance policies for that matter. So hopefully you'll get value out of this, just kind of more from a global standpoint, not just specifically premium financing. Here's the problem in the life insurance sale that I've seen a lot of agents struggle with. They may make a great client presentation, right? So let's remove the clarity of articulation. Let's just say you're a pro at that. You make this great client presentation, and what happens? After the presentation, the client says, okay, let me think about it. And what do? They go and talk to somebody else. Now, who is that?
Brother-in-law.
What was that, Dan?
Brother-in-law.
Yeah. Their brother-in-law, their spouse, who are not necessarily financial geniuses. They are certainly not life insurance specialists. They're not economists, but they talk to a non-expert. And what is that non-expert experience? Well, the client now is going to try to explain your proposal to their brother-in-law or their whoever. And the problem is you have now outsourced your sales process to an unqualified life insurance agent, which is your prospect. You're expecting them to do the same level of job that you do. Well, that's unrealistic. It's not their fault. It's not what they do. So now after they butcher the explanation to their brother-in-law or whoever it is, now everyone is confused and skeptical. The brother-in-law was confused and skeptical before they even got on the call, but now the client is confused and skeptical. Their spouse is confused and skeptical. If they talk to their CPA or their attorney, they are confused and skeptical. And so now the client has doubts. Now the client has doubts. Now the next time you get on the phone with them, you got to resell the whole concept all over again. And you end up looking like the guy on the left side of the screen. This is the problem. So this is Probably, I would say the biggest hole in the life insurance sales process. Again, let's pretend that all the life insurance agents are doing a spectacular job at articulating how great this thing is for the client. Let's just assume that that's the case. Probably not the case, but let's just assume that's the case. What happens after you make this brilliant presentation? Well, now you've got the follow-up. Usually what happens after you make this fantastic presentation is the client says, hey, can you send me something? So you send them your slide deck, or you send them a carrier proposal, a carrier illustration, which we all know is 137 pages long and confusing as heck to someone that does not specialize in this particular industry. So you send them this stuff. The client's not going to remember probably at least 80% of everything you said on that call. So now they only, at best, they remember 20%. Then you load them up with this 137-page carrier illustration that just confuses the heck out of them. Why? Because they're long and complex. And again, the client is not going to know how to navigate through that carrier illustration. The language in that carrier illustration is completely unfamiliar to them. So again, they get even more confused and more skeptical. And then they try to explain it to their CPA. And then the whole thing is going to start falling apart. Again, we talked about this. They're going to get advice from unqualified people like their brother-in-law. And again, it is completely impossible for that client to articulate anything that you articulated to them. So here's one of the solutions that we have found works really, really well. There's a concept when I did and do sales coaching, I call it COC, or consistency of content. If you could communicate the concept in the most concise, most clear way every single time, that would be extremely advantageous, right? Your closing percentage, if you want to call it that, your clarity component would go straight through the roof if you could do that every single time. The problem is we are human beings. I am not as good live as I am if I recorded 500 live presentations and went in and found the best one and edited that best foot forward that I did. So what we've done is we now create custom client videos that are edited. So essentially it's a highlight reel of that meeting with the client, where I am actually stepping through slide by slide, the most important slides, and highlighting the most important concepts that we discussed in that meeting. We record that in a video, and then we give the client access to that video. It's great because it's easy for that client to recall things that they wanted to recall that maybe they forgot. So they can pause it, they can rewind it, they can watch it a gazillion times over and over. Easy for them to recall the main points. And again, we have that COC, we have that consistency of content. Not only is it good for clarity purposes, but from a compliance standpoint and for accuracy purposes, to have an edited video on file is really going to protect your butt if the client tries to come back and says, well, I didn't understand something, and tries to blame you for not disclosing something. Well, if it's in the video, that is a good piece of content to have in the client file. Extremely important. And by the way, when I edit my own videos, even when I do webinars, many of the webinars I broadcast are recorded and edited because I'm a human being. Like even on this live webinar we're recording right now, I've got to be careful that I don't make an honest error in misspeaking. So for example, if I say, if I said 70% allocation into an S&P index and 30% into, fill in the blank. If I said 30 versus 70 or 70 versus 30, that could be an honest verbal blunder. But if the client heard me misspeak, that's a problem. In an edited video, the chances of that happening go way down to almost zero, right? So it's a way to make sure that your content is accurate, which is great for compliance purposes. They can also forward the video link to their CPA or their brother-in-law or whoever it is that they want to share this content with. And now the person that is watching the video is hearing it directly from the horse's mouth, right? All parties experiencing that content or experiencing it firsthand directly from the source. So it's a huge, huge benefit to have this as one of the tools that we offer all the agents that we do joint work with when we do a premium financing case. So again, I'll go over all the reasons, why our agents across the country use Lionsmark Capital as their sole source to do premium financing. But what I thought I would do is I'll show you a case study, and I'm going to show you that this case study in the exact format that the client would receive that video in. So we're going to go ahead and get started here. I'll come back on live after this case study.
Okay, so the purpose of this session is to walk you through a custom designed life insurance solution designed specifically for you based on what your life insurance agent told us about your age and your specific financial needs. And if you've ever applied for life insurance before, then you know that we won't know the exact numbers until we submit an application along with the paramed exam to the life insurance company and go through full formal underwriting. But these numbers will give you a good estimation of what we might expect based on what we know about your current situation so far. So today we're going to introduce a concept to you called premium financing, which uses lender capital to finance your life insurance premiums. Now, this may seem like a new concept to you. However, it's not all that different than how you've probably purchased other valuable assets in the past. For example, maybe you financed your college tuition using student loans, or purchased real estate using a mortgage loan, or expanded a business using a business loan or a business line of credit. Well, because you have a substantial net worth, the life insurance companies allow you to purchase your life insurance policy using a similar method, leveraging a bank's capital to fund your life insurance premiums. Now, you could obviously just pay the premiums out of pocket yourself for 10, 20, or 30 years, for example. And at end of life, the life insurance company would pay out the death benefit tax-free. But if you have a large enough net worth and the size of your policy is large enough, you can actually finance the premiums and let the bank pay the premiums for you, during which time you'd owe interest on the borrowed premiums, which is a lot less than paying the actual premiums out of pocket. And this can allow you to deploy the cash flow savings into other assets like your business or real estate or other investment opportunities. Now, inside the life insurance policy is an interest-bearing account that grows over time. So much so that its appreciated value can actually repay the bank loan in full at some point, and the remaining net death benefit would pay out tax-free at end of life. Now, there are several different lending platforms available, based on your net worth, size of the policy, and a number of different factors. But based on what you shared with your life insurance advisor, we've designed the most prudent premium financing solution specifically for you. It's called partial equity interest accrual, and we'll walk you through the mechanics of how this works right now. By the way, you also receive a full detailed report of all the mathematical calculations used to produce the numbers that you'll see in this depiction. So in this particular method of premium financing, you'd pay a portion of the policy premium out of pocket each year. The lender pays the remaining premiums for you each year, and you would accrue 100% of the interest due on the premiums borrowed from the lender. Now, as I said earlier, inside the life insurance policy is an interest-bearing account that grows tax-free, and at some point, that account's appreciated value pays off the third-party lender, at which time there would be no further interest charged, because the loan is paid off, and you could pull a tax-free retirement income. Plus, you would now have a life insurance policy that's designed to stay in force until end of life. Now, the remaining death benefit at that point would then pay out to the pass-through entity that owns the policy, and your surviving spouse would get the unlimited step-up in basis and receive the proceeds tax-free as well. So let's take a look at the ledger so you can see the actual numbers in your specific design based on the assumptions that we made about your age, your health, your financial situation, and a few other factors. Again, we won't know your exact numbers until you go through full formal underwriting with the insurance carrier, which obviously hasn't happened yet. But these numbers will give you a good approximation of what could happen. Okay, so I know this is a lot of information to digest at once, but I promise I'll make this easy to understand. And again, you'll receive copies of everything we're going to review right here. Plus, you'll also receive a copy of the full carrier illustration. Okay, so the column on the far left shows the total policy premiums, and the column under yellow arrow number 1 shows the amount of premium that you would pay out of pocket each year. That's the partial equity portion. And you can kind of think of it like making micro down payments each year. And yellow arrow number 2 shows the amount of premium that the lender will pay for you. This is the amount that you're borrowing, right, or financing. Now, of that borrowed premium, there is interest due, but because you put equity payments into the policy, the lender will let you accrue that interest due each year. And that's yellow arrow number 3, which means that instead of paying the interest out of pocket, you can roll that interest back into the principal loan balance. And with our algorithmically based premium financing model, we've mathematically determined that this model is not over leveraged because you are paying equity premiums into the policy each year. In fact, if you look at how low the interest due is in the first few years compared to the equity premiums that you're paying into the policy, that's right under yellow arrow number 1, you can see that this is not an over leveraged situation. So this design is not built for clients that can't afford to pay the interest payments. It's for clients that can afford to pay the interest payments, but would rather set a contribution or an annual budget to pay each year, for simplicity purposes. Now, in the early stages of the policy, the yellow arrow number 4 shows you the estimated amount of outside collateral that you'd have to post. This collateral is usually either cash or bonds or a letter of credit or even marketable securities, depending on the lender. And if you look at the bottom of this ledger, you'll see the type of collateral that we're basing these assumptions on. So if the collateral is cash or bonds, most lenders will credit 95 to 100% of its value for collateral purposes. And if you post marketable securities as collateral, they'll usually discount the value by 25 to 50%, because if the market crashes and the securities lose 25 to 50% in value, the lender wants to make sure that the collateral still covers the entire shortfall. Now, we see after a few years, the outside collateral requirement goes down to 0. And the reason is that at that point, the policy cash value depicted here grew to a value greater than the outstanding loan balance. So if and when this happens, the policy then becomes the sole collateral on the loan. Okay, and yellow arrow number 5 shows you when the policy cash value is expected to pay off the bank loan based on these assumptions in this ledger. And even after we do that, yellow arrow number 6 shows the tax-free income drawdowns that you could receive based on certain assumptions in this ledger. And yellow arrow number 7 shows the ongoing net death benefit that would still pay out even after you take those income drawdowns. Now, the assumptions include a certain performance of this interest-bearing account inside your policy, and we'll discuss how this account's crediting method works in just a few minutes here. Okay, so when it comes to premium financing, we always want to show the logical alternative. And the logical alternative is to just buy a basic non-financed life insurance policy. So let's take a look at this comparison. Okay, so yellow arrow number 1 shows the annual premiums that you would have to pay in a non-finance policy. And yellow arrow number 2 shows the income drawdowns that you would get by paying that annual premium based on these particular assumptions of account performance. Yellow arrow number 3 shows you the partial premium payments that you would pay in the premium financing design that we just looked at in the previous slide. And yellow arrow number 4 shows the income drawdowns in that premium finance design. So over the course of time, yellow arrow number 5 shows you the difference in total income drawdowns between the non-finance policy versus the finance policy. And yellow arrow number 6 shows the total economic benefit of both designs which is the total income drawdown plus the remaining cash value at the end of the 40th year. And again, that comparison does not include the death benefit, just the income drawdown and the cash value amounts. And if you look at the graph on the right side of the screen, the green bars represent the net death benefit in the premium financing arrangement, and the orange bars represent the ongoing death benefit in the non-financed version. Now, it's important to note that these policies are designed to last until age 120 or end of life. This ledger just shows a 40-year window, but that does not necessarily mean that the benefits end after 40 years. And again, you'll receive a copy of the full carrier illustration that shows these policies lasting until age 120 or end of life. Okay, so regarding the interest-bearing account inside the life insurance policy that I mentioned earlier, and by the way, this is the same ledger we initially looked at, and these numbers, both the cash value and the death benefit, are based on the assumption that this interest-bearing account produces this static positive credit every year, year after year. Now, the way this assumption was created is based on what the life insurance regulators say is a reasonable expectation. And the way they determine what a reasonable expectation is they take the average of every rolling 25-year period over the last 65 years, and then they restrict the insurance carrier to show a credit no greater than this percentage of return. Well, there's one thing we know, and that's that the market is never going to produce this positive static return every year, right? The market's going to be up much higher than this in some years, and in some years, the market's going to be down much lower than this. So what we've done is created a proprietary software application that models 121 different historical 40-year periods that actually happened. And we've created a proxy for your policy, which we call a leveraged hypothetical synthetic asset, to show you how the charges and crediting methods, similar to the real world product, could affect outcomes over time during times of volatility, and even more importantly, during a poor sequence of returns. This is our method of stress testing the design. So here's what our software does. So we start off with this 40-year sequence with this starting point on January 1st, and we roll forward 40 consecutive years from that point up until an end point 40 years later on December 31st. Now, during this 40-year historical period, here's the compounded annual growth rate of the S&P 500 during that 40-year window. But then we said, what if the client had just started 1 month later in the same year? Say on February 1st, roll forward 40 years, and that would put an end point at January 31st, 40 years later. And then we repeated this process all the way up until very recently, which produced 121 different historical 40-year periods that we analyzed. So we tagged the period that produced the best compounded annual growth rate, those 121 different 40-year periods we analyzed, and we also tagged the period that produced the worst compounded annual growth rate out of those 121 different 40-year periods we analyzed. Now, I like to focus on the worst 40-year period because I think that's a reasonable benchmark to focus on, just to be conservative. Now, just to be clear, even though this is the period that produced the worst compounded annual growth rate out of those 121 different periods we analyzed, it is possible that the next 40 years could produce an even worse outcome than this particular 40-year period. And just like it's possible, in theory, that the next 40 years could produce an even better outcome than the best 40-year period we analyzed. So again, this is not the worst possible outcome that could ever exist in the future. This is just the worst one out of the 121 different periods that we analyzed. Now, to be clear, this proxy we're going to take a look at here is not a life insurance illustration. This is a proxy that we created to help you better understand how the charges and the crediting methods work. So to use an analogy, if we were scientists and we wanted to study the behavior of the sun, like the electromagnetic fields around the sun or the solar wind around the sun, things like that, it would be impossible to take a rocket ship up to the sun, land on the sun, scoop up a little sample of the sun, put it in a Ziploc plastic baggie and bring it back to Earth and study it in a laboratory. But we could build a proxy for the sun in the lab, like a super hot plasma blob, and then study the behavior of that to gain a better understanding of the sun's behavior. And that's exactly what they did at the University of Wisconsin-Madison. They called it the Big Red Ball, which was essentially a recreation of solar plasma that they used to study the behavior of the sun's electromagnetic fields. Essentially, they built a proxy for the sun. Well, that's what we did with this life insurance policy design. We created a proxy for the premium finance life insurance policy in our laboratory, and we call this a leveraged hypothetical synthetic asset. And the spirit of creating this was really rooted in education, all right, and our desire to help you better understand how the charges and credits work relative to the borrowing rate, instead of just showing a static positive credit every year. Okay, so here's the proxy for your specific case design using this worst 40-year period. And again, to be clear, this is not an insurance carrier illustration. This is the hypothetical synthetic asset that we created that acts as a proxy for the real world product. But its charges, fees, and crediting methods behave very similar to the premium finance life insurance product. So the goal here is to give you a more thorough understanding of how these charges and crediting methods might affect outcomes in the long run, showing you a range of potential outcomes instead of just one average outcome. And again, here we're looking at this hypothetical synthetic assets behavior during the 40-year period that produced the worst compounded annual growth rate out of the 121 different 40-year periods we analyzed. So we're being pretty conservative here. And these were the historical returns during this period. And listen, this period starts off with a terrible sequence of returns. In fact, in the first 10 years of the sequence, there were 1, 2, 3, 4 negative return years. Now, the good news is that with this design, you have a 0% floor. So in the years where the market crashed and the account produced a massive negative return, your account would be credited 0% instead of getting hit with a massive negative return in that year. Now, this comes at an expense where you give up some of the upside performance, and you can earn up to the maximum allowable return in a given year, which is known as the cap. So in the orange column here, these are the effective returns that would have been credited in each year, given the minimum return allowable, the 0% floor, and the maximum return allowable. But there's one important thing to understand when it comes to how the crediting method actually works. Before the annual credit, the charges are deducted. Now, in this proxy model during the 40-year period that produced the worst compounded annual growth rate out of the 121 different periods analyzed, we deduct standard charges at the beginning of each year. Now, these charge amounts were taken directly out of a carrier illustration that we ran, which include the state taxes, cost of insurance, and all the other charges and fees that exist in the carrier illustration that we ran. Now, in a real life insurance policy, these charges may be a little bit different based on the health rating that you eventually get approved at after you go through full underwriting with the carrier, as well as how the interest-bearing account actually performs in real life. But for the sake of this hypothetical proxy, we'll assume that these charges are static. Now, in some cases, you may qualify to opt in for additional asset-based charges in exchange for a multiplier bonus. Now, not all products have this option, so we'll have to discuss this in greater detail with you before you make any decisions. But here's how this option works. If you select this feature, after the floor and cap have been applied, the annual credit is multiplied by the multiplier factor, creating the effective annual credit, which is the percentage of gain that your account would receive in that year. So in a year where you receive a positive return, the multiplier bonus really supercharges that return, giving you a much higher effective annual credit. Again, some products have this feature and some don't. And the ones that do, you can actually elect to turn this feature on or off at the beginning of any given year at policy anniversary. Now, the downside of this feature is that in a year wherein the market produces a negative return and you get a 0% annual credit, well, 0 multiplied by the multiplier factor is still 0, and you would still incur the additional asset-based charge. So in a year where you get a 0 credit, that doesn't mean that you don't lose any account value, because although you didn't get a negative return, the charges would still decrease your account value in a year where you received a 0% annual credit. Well, the question is, after all the charges, is this still a product worth financing in this type of arrangement that we've been talking about? Well, let's find out based on your specific numbers that we modeled. So this is the reason why this backtesting report is so valuable. We showcase this synthetic proxy depiction during the best and worst 40-year periods analyzed, with all the charges deducted and the credits with any bonuses that may exist. And we compare it to a depiction using the static return assumption shown in the carrier illustration. So the data in this graph shows the simulated account values of our proxy during the period that produced the best compounded annual growth rate out of the 121 different historical periods analyzed in the heavily dashed green line. It also shows the simulated account values of our proxy during the period that produced the worst compound annual growth rate out of those 121 different historical periods analyzed in the dotted green line versus the account values assuming a static return, similar to what is depicted in the carrier illustration right there in the blue. Now, what's also interesting to point out is that the black line uses the same data as depicted in the carrier illustration's death benefit based on that static return assumption that we see at the bottom of the page there. Now, if the actual cash values in a real world life insurance policy were equal to these green dashed and dotted lines, and they eclipsed the black line in this graph, the actual death benefit would automatically have to be pushed up, because in a real world life insurance policy, the death benefit must always be higher than the cash value at any given time. And it's important to note that both the outcomes in the hypothetical synthetic asset and the numbers in the carrier illustration are hypothetical depictions, right? Nobody knows what the future performance of the market is going to look like. So none of these hypothetical depictions are guaranteed. But the spirit of what we're showing you here is rooted in transparency and client education, so you can better understand the crediting method and the assumptions made that produce this range of hypothetical outcomes. Again, all of this content is purely for educational purposes to briefly explain these hypothetical models. The slides in this presentation are just a few slides taken out of the entire report. So for a full description and detailed overview, a full report will be made available to you for your review. And as we wrap up here, this last slide shows a backtesting comparison. Left side of the screen is the 40-year period with the best compounded annual growth rate out of the 121 different 40-year periods we analyzed. And on the left side is the worst 40. Up top, the green bars show the total income drawn down in the leveraged hypothetical synthetic asset. That's the proxy for the premium finance life insurance policy. And then the blue bars show the income drawdowns in the non-leveraged hypothetical equities and bonds account. The graphs at the bottom of the screen show the ongoing account values of each after the annual income drawdowns are taken. And as you can see, the blue dotted line, that's the non-leveraged, non-insurance account, that gets drawn down to 0. So you'll receive a fully detailed ledger of how these accounts were constructed in terms of the fee structure and tax assumptions. So make sure you ask your life insurance advisor about the assumptions made. And remember, in a real world life insurance policy, if you were to unexpectedly die, even in the first year, the policy would pay out the net death benefit compared to not using a life insurance-based solution, which is the blue line. your heirs would only get the account value minus any taxes due. And lastly, we're going to give you access to my book, Premium Finance Life Insurance, the key to effective estate tax planning. And you can access the ebook version of this book for free at lionsmarkcapital.com. Obviously, we only cover the general highlights of the overall program. So if you'd like to set up a live Zoom call with me to discuss any of the elements we discussed here, go ahead and schedule that call through your life insurance agent. Because at the end of the day, even though LionSmark Capital specializes in premium financing, we essentially work for your trusted life insurance agent. They're the reason why you're being granted access to our platform. And if we can get you qualified for this premium financing arrangement, we'll all be working together to implement this for you. So we look forward to meeting you soon. Okay.
Okay, let me turn my video back on here. All right. So hopefully that gives you a good understanding of how, or one of several ways that we can finance life insurance policies, but equally as importantly, and maybe even more importantly, if you could have a customized video like that for every single case that we work on together that you could forward to your client, just think about how much their level of understanding would increase, and then how much value it would be to be able to have them forward that video or the link to that video to, again, whether it's their brother-in-law or their CPA or whoever it may be. It just, again, they're hearing it directly from the source. The other thing that we are starting to find with the forwarding of these videos is that it's a great way to get referrals. So when your prospect or client forwards it to whoever it is that they're going to forward it to, they may look at that video and say, geez, maybe I ought to do this for myself. I've got a client, a professional athlete, and his father-in-law, he forwarded it to his father-in-law. His father-in-law is too old to do this now, but his father-in-law says, man, this looks, I wish I knew about this when I was younger. Now, how much confidence does that give my client when his father-in-law, who he greatly respects, is endorsing the idea of doing this because the father-in-law heard the explanation from me as opposed to hearing it from his son-in-law, who does not specialize in premium finance life insurance, right?
Right.
A lot of value there. So the things that make LionSmark Capital very, very different from other premium financing firms. One, again, we have multiple financing platforms. The one that we saw in that case study is where the client pays in a flat dollar amount that goes directly towards premium. They borrow a little bit less, and then they accrue the interest. Another way to do it is just something real vanilla where they borrow 100% of the premiums and they pay interest out of pocket. Excuse me. Another way to do it is kind of a hybrid between those two, where they pay a reduced annual premium in years 1 and 2. They pay it completely out of pocket, and financing doesn't start until year 3. And in that scenario, the client does not need to post any outside collateral. So if you have young doctors, young business owners, when I say young, say sub age 50, and they have high incomes, but don't necessarily have a lot of liquid net worth that they can post as collateral.
What do they call those, Darren? They call those Henrys, right? High earners,
Right.
not rich yet.
That's right. Yeah. We did a 44-year-old doctor, exact example, 44-year-old doctor in private practice, home's worth about $1.4 million. He's got a big mortgage on it, single dad. He's got a son in high school, reporting about 300 in income. He's actually making about 600 in income, and doesn't have a whole lot of cash just laying around, right? He's got it all invested in his house and his business. Guy like that is a perfect candidate to do something like this. In fact, in his case, he had a term policy that had about 12 years left on it, and was stuffing money into a SEP.
Mm-hmm.
And we modeled, here's what you're doing now, let's back test it. And then here's what you could be doing with us. And we back tested it and put it side by side, and the math just, you couldn't not do it after you saw the math on that.
Right.
So again, we have multiple different financing platforms. The rates and loan terms, it depends on, again, the design of the financing arrangement. It depends on the liquidity and the net worth of the client. On the upper end of rates, we have guaranteed fixed 10-year money at 4.5%. All the way to the other end of the spectrum, we've got annual renewable rates. If the premium is over $1 million a year, annual renewable rate is the lowest one is 1.4%, which is crazy. We've
Amazing.
got 3-year, we got 3-year money at 2.25. We got 5-year money at 2.5. We even have a lender that will accept real estate equity as collateral, which is unheard of in the premium financing space.
Yes.
We have 14 different lenders on our platform. We'll find the right one for your client. Obviously, as you saw in the case study, we have this really cool proprietary backtesting software that nobody has. We went around to all the advanced markets attorneys with all the carriers. They all know exactly what we're doing. Well, we've got their blessing in terms of how we're modeling it. And again, to be very, very accurate from a compliance standpoint, you probably heard me say, you're probably rolling your eyes going, geez, how many times are you going to say 121 different versions with the worst compound annual growth rate out of the 121 different versions that we looked at, right? Very specific, that talking about it's a proxy, it's not an actual carrier illustration. All that language we had vetted out by all these advanced markets attorneys to make sure that we weren't violating any compliance issues or AG 49A or anything like that. And then lastly, having those client videos, I think, is something very, very unique that provides a lot of value. It makes it easier for your client to understand everything.
Yeah, and Darren, let me just touch on that really quickly, because I think there's so much power in that video from an advisor perspective. You know, when I see advisors get prepped for these calls, you know, they're sweating, they're wringing their hands, you know, because they're concerned that the client's going to ask a question that they don't know the answer to. And, you know, I see them get off the tracks a lot, getting into the weeds of the numbers. And next thing you know, we're focused on something that's completely not related to the sale, and more of this analytical analysis of these collateral spreadsheets. So I think the customized video takes all of that off the table for our advisors and really lets the expert, you, Darren, talk to the client and hit the highlighted points. And from the advisor's perspective, they can re-review that video so that they can kind of get more comfortable with the sale. So I think there's tremendous value in that. I think it takes off, you know, most of the advisors that are doing these types of policies are probably not premium finance experts. They may have 4, 5, 6 high net worth clients, maybe 20 high net worth clients that they want to show this to, because, you know, as we know, it's not for everyone. And so it might be different than their current business. And so they're saying, wait a minute, now I got to take a PhD in premium financing and get a doctorate in premium financing just to, you know, show this to my client, because I have 3 other lines of business with them. And if I don't know what I'm talking about here, it starts to crack the egg on the other things that I am an expert on. So I can't tell you enough how I think that video is amazing and very important to the advisors and all their centers of influence and the clients, because, you know, clients want to review this when they're in their bed, you know, before they're going to bed. They want to watch it on their iPad. They don't, you know, it's all on demand, so they can see it when it's comfortable for them and they have a quiet time to review it, as opposed to the advisor chasing them down to try to get them on a live Zoom with you. So again, I can't touch enough on that. I think it's a great piece of the sales process that you've developed. So thank you for that.
I appreciate you saying that. Well, you know, I mean, I'll use an example out of my own personal life. Every time I try to explain something to my wife that I'm not an expert in, I sound like a total idiot. Right? Even it doesn't matter how good this thing is I'm trying to explain to my wife.
Yeah.
If that's not what I do every day, I am not going to sound, it's going to make it sound not as good as it actually is, you know?
Yeah. And I think that goes back to your clarity of content. I mean, in your sales process, you really drive home that these advisors should know this stuff cold, and they should be able to deliver the very best presentation every single time. And by doing that, and by having these videos, it really helps that sales process. So I'm a believer in that.
Yeah, think of it from a relationship dynamic standpoint as well. If an advisor is now sitting on the proverbial same side of the table as your client, and together you're watching the video content, The video is the one pitching the client. The agent doesn't feel like they're selling. The agent is able to advise and critique the content that they're both seeing together, they're experiencing together, agent and client. Radically changes the relationship dynamic.
Yes, agreed.
The last thing I'll wrap up with here, then we'll open up to Q&A, is I've identified a handful of what I would call the best targeted opportunities right now that exist. We have found a huge uptick in large premium financing death benefit driven cases. About a year ago, I would say about 75% of our business was accumulation and future retirement income drawdown focused. This year, it's completely the opposite, maybe even more so, maybe about 80% estate planning driven, because everyone's freaked out about what the current administration is going to do with lowering the estate tax threshold. So folks that are worried about taxes, all of a sudden, the conversation is opening up now in a way that it was not opening up a year and a half ago. So a huge opportunity there talking about estate taxes. The other thing, kind of in a similar vein, the whole concept of having a tax-free retirement income stream, right? The LIRPs, life insurance retirement plans. When you put a 10-pay, say a $50,000 annual premium, 10-pay, non-financed, compared to putting $50,000 a year into a finance policy, as you saw in that case study, the income drawdown is tremendously greater when they're financing because they've got all that leverage working for them. So you can transparently and objectively say, look, you can put the money, the 50 grand a year into a managed investment account and we back test it. You put the 50 grand a year into a non-finance policy and back test it. And we can put a 50 grand a year into the finance policy and back test it. And you line them all up, all apples to apples. The math will tell the truth, right? You cannot, that's what I love about math. I'm not saying this because I'm Asian and I'm genetically superior at math. I'm saying this because the thing I love about math is the math doesn't lie. The math is the math. Math is either incorrect or it's correct, right? It's either true or false. And that's a position that is impossible to argue and is void of opinions, right? No one cares about Darren's opinion. What you care about is the mathematical, the indisputable mathematical truth. At least that's what they should be concerned about. Another big opportunity, enforce policies with cash value. I don't care if they're VULs that are about to implode. I don't care if it's a well-designed IUL or a well-designed whole life policy. When you show the client, look, here's what happens if you stay the course with your current policy. Here's what happens if you 1035 the value into a finance policy. We could oftentimes design the finance policy to where their annual contribution is very similar, if not the exact same as it is in their current in-force non-finance policy. And when we see the death benefit increase, we see the increase in income drawdown potential out of the finance version. They're crazy not to do it. I did this with my wife's policy years ago. This is one of the first policies I ever financed. She had a whole life policy. We're about 5 years in, and we looked at the income drawdown at age 65. Then we 1035 that into an IUL and showed the income drawdown. Income drawdown was about 2.5 times greater, and the death benefit was 5.3 times greater.
Wow.
Guess how long it took me to convince my wife to make that 1035 switch? My wife is very intelligent, has been in the insurance game longer than me, actually, sharp as a tack, but she's my wife and I'm her husband. And you know how that goes when you try to convince your wife to do something.
Right. It's
usually going to be met with skepticism and an argument, right? Years went by where I was trying to get her to flip from her whole life policy into an IUL. She didn't want to do it. I showed her the finance version and the difference. Or still remember this. We're sitting in our kitchen at the center island on our stools. 5 minutes into it, she goes, all right, how do we transfer? I'm like, really? It was that fast. Because why? Clarity, mathematical clarity. The last thing I'll talk about here, we're doing this with one of Dan's agents at Alpine, 2 guys actually. We are doing a group plan, 10 engineers, all funded by the engineering firm. We're financing these policies on these engineers, not for the death benefit. They are categorically, they are key man policies, but they're doing this to fund the retirement for those engineers. So it's an employee retention, engineering retention strategy. And what was great about it is they said, look, here's what we were going to do with investing money. I said, all right, let's use the same budget and let's use some of it, peel it off to finance these policies. And we showed again, side by side, apples to apples. Once they saw the outcome, they couldn't not do this because they're engineers, they're smart, right? They're technical, they're very detail oriented. And our proposition is really speaking their language. Why? Indisputable math. So let's go ahead and open up the Q&A. Dan, if you want to take it over from here.
Do have a couple Q&A Q&As coming in here. The first one, Darren, is how long does this process take? Because I know that's one thing that we didn't touch on that I know you're having some success with as far as how long the process takes. Typically when someone hears premium finance, they're thinking, oh my God, this is going to be forever. But why don't you touch on that a little bit? That was from John C. How long does the process take?
Sure. That is definitely the perception that premium financing cases take so long to close. Some of them do take long to close. I'll give you an example of one that was a real pain in the butt. Very wealthy individual. He had 27 different LLCs that he had fractional ownership in. So we got to collect all these financials, got to go through all this financial underwriting. A case like that could take, a month and a half to 2 months to underwrite on the premium financing side, right?
Yes.
Let alone the carrier underwriting. The good news, however, is that we can underwrite the financing piece of it and the carrier underwriting concurrently. So right now, Dan, what are you finding the average turnaround time is to get a case approved on the carrier level? 4 to 6 weeks?
Yeah, I would say 30 to 45 days if we're not, searching for things.
Yeah. That's about the same from a financing standpoint. I can even take you through a timeline. I have some lenders that are much more stringent in the underwriting process than others. I have some lenders that can turn around a term sheet. In other words, we can get a commitment in 48 hours, which is really fast.
Yes.
Once we have that term sheet in place, the client, if they're going to post collateral, it will usually take about a week for them to move the collateral, or if they're going to keep the collateral where it's at, to get a collateral assignment against that collateral. So add on another week, and then usually about a week to a week and a half to fund. So all in, if we use that assumption that I just gave you right there, we could be funding in 3 to 4 weeks, whereas with the carrier, it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks. So we usually get the funding side done on the premium financing side faster than the carrier underwriting.
Waiting on the medical approval and
Yes.
the underwriting approval.
Yeah, we've had some cases beginning to end, both on the carrier side and the premium financing side. Whole thing is done in 4 to 5 weeks.
One other question here from looks like Nancy. Talk a little bit about the range of net worth for an individual that this may work with, Darren. I know that there are some net worth parameters around some of the lenders, and really where should our agents be looking as far as the net worth, as far as a ballpark?
Yeah, net worth amounts are usually dictated by the carriers. So as an example, on the upper end, Nationwide's net worth requirement is 10 million. On the lower end side, National Life Group's net worth is 2.5 million. Allianz, if they're making 400,000 a year or greater, they don't really have a net worth requirement.
Mm-hmm.
So once we find out what the net worth is, that's going to narrow down the carriers pretty quickly. Securion's 5 million. So everyone's got a little bit different appetite in terms of what they'll allow from a carrier standpoint. From a lending standpoint, it depends on, again, the lender. Some lenders, I have one lender, a couple lenders that won't even touch a case unless the client has a personal net worth of 15 million.
Mm-hmm.
Other lenders could care less what the client's net worth is. All they're looking at is the policy design, because the cash value is going to serve as some of the collateral. And then they're looking at the account that their liquid collateral is in. If it's a securities account, brokerage account, cash, TD, whatever it is. In some of those cases, they don't even care what the net worth is. So there's a pretty big range. We'll find the right setup. I would say, unless it is a young doctor with a $400,000 or greater income, I would say I would not go below that if their net worth is not there.
Gotcha.
If their net worth is 2.5 million to 5 million, and they're making say 250, right? Maybe they're a trust fund kid and they're quote unquote only pulling out 250 a year because they live on a relatively
Tiny home. They live in a tiny home.
Yeah, but they've got the cash sitting around.
Right.
The carrier and the lender too, but mostly the carrier is more concerned with reputational damage. In other words, if the client is making, say, 300,000 a year, and they've got 250,000 in net worth, and they got a big house, but they got a big mortgage on it, and they're a small business owner. If their business gets crushed, like in a 2008 scenario, or in like a COVID scenario, and their business falls apart, all of a sudden they're in the poorhouse. Now they can't afford to make their interest payment. And now they're going to say, oh, the agent talked me into doing the stupid life. I went into debt by the stupid life insurance policy. That could cause some reputational damage. Whereas someone with a significant amount of net worth, if things in the world don't go as planned, they have enough cash sitting on the sidelines to be able to continue to fund this.
Yes. Good. Great answer. I think there's one other question. Is there a solution for a person that's uninsurable? Maybe their loved ones or the other spouse, or how do you guys approach that?
Yeah, absolutely. If they have a healthy spouse, that's usually an easy way to do it. If they're doing this for cash value accumulation and income, I would almost call the spouse like a cash value surrogate, right? We're using their healthy body as the insured person, when reality is the couple may be doing this more for cash value accumulation and future retirement income. We've had situations where the prospective insured person is, say, 75. Typically, if they're over the age of 73, premium financing is usually not a good option for them. So I've had situations where they would put a policy on their adult kids. So maybe they have a 50-year-old adult child, and there's a crossover point to where they say, well, we want to put the death benefit on generation one because they were going to need the money to pay the estate taxes. Well, if generation one is not insurable, depending on what the age and health is of generation two, it may make more sense to put the policy on generation two and design it for cash value accumulation, where if the death benefit is here on generation one, the cash value accumulation might actually surpass the death benefit on generation one if it's designed for accumulation. We've done that before several times as well. The last thing we could do is that if it's a cash value play and the insured person owns a business, they could put key man policies on their employees, and the justification for the insurance is key man. But in reality, what they're doing is they're using those insured bodies as cash value surrogates, and they're using the cash value in those that mix of policies for their own benefit. So lots of different ways to structure.
Okay, great. Well, I think that wraps up the Q&A session. I don't see any more on the radar screen there. So I'd like to thank everybody for attending today, especially thank Darren for jumping on the line with us. It's been a great partnership with him. I'm very impressed with his presentation skills. I do not have any hesitancy to put him on with our advisors or our clients. We do have some wonderful cases that are that have just closed and that are about to close with him. So we've seen it full circle all the way to completion. So we're very happy with that. And I would just recommend, if you do have some questions on this, please contact your account executive at Alpine Brokerage at 866-777-2006 via phone or directly to their email address. And we thank everyone for attending today and look forward to working with you on some of these cases. So thank you very much, Darren.
Appreciate you, Dan.